Hey, welcome in everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here on WCNC Plus with your live weather impact. Tonight's a big night. The full topic of tonight's show is going to be our winter forecast. You know, I've been doing this for 21 years now. It started off as just kind of fun. Really they didn't let me do this on TV back in the day. It was like a thing I did for fun because I love snow, I love skiing, I love the winter forecast. And so it's been something I've had a little passion for the last 2 decades plus. And so tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to reveal it on streaming only, so to make it kind of interesting. So here's a look at my winter weather impact. We're going to focus just on the forecast here in the first 8 minutes or so, but then Tim's going to join me. He's talking about the winter forecast for the Greensboro area, by the way. We're going to compare notes and talk about it. So if you have questions, shoot them to us, 704-329-3600. Anything I say or anything I don't say, I'd love to hear from you because I think that would be really cool to talk about what you guys think about this forecast as we get into it. So first things first, let's talk a little bit about when our average snow falls across our area. So in the Charlotte area, we broke this down by month just to give you a kind of perspective on when the snow falls. So you can see very little November, though we're going to talk about that little bit we got last Monday. December, not a lot. The 2 months we get the most snow, January, February, and that's going to be key to my forecast as well. But really February, and this says something because remember February only has 28 days and then 29 days during leap year. So it has the least amount of days of any of the winter or cool season months, but it has produced the biggest percentage of snow. So if you want to see snow in the Charlotte area, it's really February, and I'll be honest with you, that first week of March. Statistically, the snowiest single calendar day in Charlotte, meaning the most snow that has fallen on a single calendar day over our entire history, is actually March 2nd. There's been so many big storms in that last week of February into early March. A lot of that has to do with the pattern that we have in the southeast. It's when the cold air is still lingering, but we start to get that active storm track. So that's the time of year we typically see snow. But I will mention November because last week we had our first trace of snow. But on average, our first measurable snow in the Charlotte area, on average, it can happen earlier, we can get it in December, is January 9th. So if it doesn't snow at all in December, don't think we're never going to see snow because that's not normally when we see it. It is January. So the mean date, if you will, where we get measurable snow is usually right around January 9th. So we got to talk about this upcoming season. What is going to happen with El Niño, La Niña? We call that ENSO for short. It's the combination of either one. El Niño Southern Oscillation is what that ENSO stands for. Last year, we had a pretty strong El Niño. This year, the forecast and where we currently are is in a weak La Niña. So that's the basis of our forecast this year, looking at what happens during a weak La Niña. You may ask, Brad, what does happen when we have a La Niña pattern during the winter? Well, cooler than average water over the equatorial Pacific does produce warmer than normal conditions across the southeast and drier. But notice where that jet stream is. This is key. The jet stream is typically here across the Ohio Valley. We tend to be on the warm side, but because that active jet stream is so close to us, we can occasionally get a storm to sneak down here. So you should never write off a La Niña winter, especially a weak La Niña winter. Now, when we're talking about snowfall averages in these different regimes, in the Charlotte area, our all-time average, which goes back 147 years, if we count this year now, is 5.4. But the last 30 years, the 30-year average has dropped to 3.5. And in the last 10 years, that average is even more meager at 2 inches. So if you think it hasn't snowed a lot lately, you would be correct. Remember, we had our first 2 snowless years in a row before last year. We finally saw, I think it was 1.2 inches. Now, in El Niño years, 5.6 is the average. In La Niña years, though, 4.1. And what is La Nada? That's the neutral phase. Actually, what's interesting is our weather in the winter, when we have a weak El Niño or a weak La Niña or even a neutral kind of in the middle, that tends to be our best snow years. It's not when we have really strong El Niños or La Niñas. It's really when we're more in the middle of those two. And so when we look at some of the other things that I look at from a checklist standpoint, where are we with that ENSO? Well, right now with the weak La Niña, that usually means warm and dry. Above average snowfall in Siberia this year, there was slightly above. We looked at that in October. That usually means cold and dry. Arctic sea ice, unfortunately, still near record lows. That typically means warm and dry. And because of climate change and warm sea surface temperatures over most of the equatorial areas of the Atlantic, the Gulf, and the East Coast, that tends to be warm and dry. So typically a lot of the checklist, like indicators, would mean warm and dry. So overall, I would think warm and dry, but most people just care about the snow. Snowfall over La Niñas recently, obviously 22, 23, we had 0. But look at 21, 22, 4.3. And I want you to focus on 2010, 11. That was a very decent La Nina year. We had cold and snowy weather. That was one of the coldest winters I remember here in Charlotte. And that's always a wild card. So not all La Ninas are created the same. Remember our forecasting rules. Where do we look? I put the little check there because 3 to 5 days out is when you start to see the actual snow chances. So just remember that when we start getting into some of these forecasts. So let's get to the forecast. Cut to the chase, Brad, right? What am I forecasting temperature-wise? I think we will be above average, but not by a lot. I think it'll be just slightly above, so not a blowtorch. Certainly no big blowtorch this year. I think we'll actually see temperatures maybe close to average or a little bit above, maybe a half a degree to a degree, so not crazy. Rainfall-wise, this includes all precipitation, not just snow. It's going to be dry. I think the drought's going to continue. I just don't see a very wet pattern developing this winter. But what about snow? We can still have a dry winter and have snow. Remember, snow is 90% air. So you don't need a ton of moisture. You just have to have moisture and cold air time up. So snowfall, I actually think most of the Western Carolinas could be slightly above, and then many areas of the Piedmont near average. So I do think we're going to get snow this year. And as I do every year, I started doing this a couple years ago, let's look at the bold forecast. I like to forecast some ranges for some of the major cities across our area: Boone, Hickory, Charlotte. Boone's average snowfall is 25.6. I'm going to go 28 to 35. Hickory's average snowfall is 6.9 inches. I'm going to go 6 to 8 this year. And for Charlotte, our average snowfall is 3.5 inches, as I mentioned, over the 30-year average. I'm going to go slightly above, but if we get near average, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm going to go 3 to 6 inches, which would be the most snow we have seen in quite a while. Because I think this pattern is actually going to be pretty topsy-turvy, I think the chance of timing out 1 to 3 winter storms at some point late in the season, and I'm particularly talking January, February, is more than likely. So I do think we're going to see snow this year, but it will be mild. Coming up, Tim Buckley and I are going to kind of compare notes and talk about the winter forecast. Send your questions in, though.